While INFJs are known for their warmth, insight, and deep concern for others, INFJs also have strong boundaries they don't let others cross. These boundaries are not always visible on the surface, as INFJs tend to be diplomatic and reserved. However, there are certain lines that, once crossed, can lead to the silent closing of emotional doors or even relationships, possibly for good. One of the most sacred boundaries for an INFJ is their emotional and psychological space. Despite their appearance of openness and compassion, INFJs are deeply private individuals. They take time to process emotions and thoughts internally, and they do not easily share their true selves with others. Pressuring them to open up before they're ready or demanding access to their inner world without earning their trust will feel invasive and deeply unsettling. They need to feel emotionally safe and respected in order to reveal their deepest thoughts, and any attempt to bypass this process may be perceived as manipulative or disrespectful. Authenticity is another non-negotiable value for INFJs. They detest insincerity, hidden agendas, or shallow behavior. If they sense that someone is being fake, using them, or playing emotional games, they will silently withdraw. INFJs are intuitive to a degree that can be almost unsettling for others. They often just know when something isn't right. Once they pick up on disingenuous motives, no amount of charm or persuasion will earn their trust again. They may not confront the person directly, but they will emotionally detach and re-establish their inner boundary with firmness and resolve. Criticism that targets their core values or their idealistic nature can also be a significant boundary violation. INFJs are driven by a vision of how the world could be, often focusing on moral and ethical integrity, justice, and compassion. When someone belittles their dreams, mocks their intensity, or dismisses their sensitivity as weakness, it can feel like an attack on their very essence. They can absorb a great deal of constructive feedback, but condescension, cruelty, or repeated invalidation of their ideals will lead them to retreat and reevaluate whether the relationship is worth maintaining. Another boundary INFJs will not allow others to cross is a disregard for their need for solitude. While they care deeply for people and are often excellent listeners, INFJs recharge in solitude. They require time alone to process the emotional residue of the world around them, and this is not negotiable. People who take offense at their need for space, or who try to guilt them into constant availability, will inevitably be met with distance. INFJs will quietly drift away from those who do not understand or respect this essential aspect of their personality. Control and manipulation are major red flags that INFJs instinctively resist. Due to their high empathy, they often understand people's motivations better than they let on. If someone tries to guilt-trip them, use emotional leverage, or dominate them mentally or emotionally, an INFJ's quiet resolve will harden. While they may seem passive or soft-spoken on the surface, INFJs have an iron will when it comes to their autonomy. Once they recognize a pattern of manipulation, they will assert boundaries that are rarely reversed. Dishonesty is another deal-breaker. INFJs crave deep, meaningful relationships built on mutual trust. If they discover someone has been lying, especially about something that affects the emotional intimacy of the relationship, it's often a non-reparable breach. Even small lies can grow into larger cracks in the foundation of trust, and INFJs will usually remove themselves from a dynamic they no longer believe to be honest or safe. Also, dismissing or devaluing their emotional experiences is a line that cannot be crossed without consequence. INFJs experience emotions with incredible depth and often carry the emotional weight of others along with their own. When someone ridicules their feelings, labels them as too much, or consistently invalidates their emotional perspective, it causes a rupture that may be impossible to mend. They will not remain close to someone who does not recognize or respect the profound emotional lens through which they view the world. Another boundary involves being rushed or forced into major decisions, especially those involving emotional commitments. INFJs require time to deeply process choices, often using their introverted intuition to see ahead, exploring long-term implications before committing. They resist pressure, especially from those who are more impulsive or who demand certainty in situations where the INFJ needs space to feel aligned, pushing them to move faster than they're ready, whether in relationships, work, or emotional disclosures, feels destabilizing and even coercive. When others ignore this need for internal alignment, the INFJ will not argue or push back aggressively. They will simply start to retreat and protect their inner clarity. Another subtle but sacred boundary relates to the sanctity of their vision or purpose. INFJs are often mission-driven, whether in big life causes or quiet, personal projects. They invest a deep part of themselves into what they do, and that work is often tied to their identity. Dismissing their passion, interrupting their creative flow, or deriding their dreams as unrealistic can be perceived not just as criticism, but as a betrayal. They don't need others to agree with their purpose, but they need it to be honored. Undermining their mission or purpose-based efforts is a fast track to emotional disconnection, because INFJs wrap so much of their soul into the meaningful work they pursue. Being used, whether emotionally, intellectually, or spiritually, is another form of boundary violation that INFJs will not tolerate. Because they are so willing to support others, they are often magnets for those who need healing, attention, or guidance. While INFJs don't mind giving, they are extremely sensitive to imbalance. If someone continually takes from them, drawing out their energy, time, empathy, or advice, without genuine reciprocity or appreciation, the INFJ will eventually hit a quiet but resolute limit. They may ghost, disappear gently, or disengage with polite detachment, but inside, a clear line has been drawn. I am not your emotional dumping ground. INFJs draw the line when it comes to being pigeonholed or misunderstood on purpose. While they can be warm and agreeable, they are not simplistic or easy to categorize. People who reduce them to stereotypes, e.g., you're just shy, or you're too sensitive, or who deny the complexity of their thought process may find themselves subtly but permanently distanced. INFJs desire to be seen as they are: deep, layered, paradoxical. When someone refuses to understand their complexity or belittles their internal contradictions, it's not just frustrating, it's alienating. The INFJ will begin to emotionally disengage, sensing that the relationship cannot support their truth. Emotional volatility and toxic conflict are also hard stops for most INFJs. They crave harmony, not because they are weak or conflict-averse, but because chaos disrupts their ability to think and feel clearly. While they can engage in tough conversations when necessary, what they won't tolerate is yelling, name-calling, manipulation through anger, or drama for its own sake. Loud, reactive energy feels invasive to their nervous system. In the presence of such outbursts, they won't fight fire with fire. They will go silent, observe, and then, quietly and permanently, withdraw. Another crucial boundary lies in how INFJs protect the people they care about. Their loyalty runs deep, and they often advocate fiercely for those they love, even to their own detriment. However, if someone attacks, harms, or disrespects someone the INFJ holds dear, especially someone vulnerable or voiceless, that loyalty can become a line in stone. Disrespecting or endangering someone the INFJ has emotionally adopted into their inner circle is not easily forgiven, because their empathy extends beyond themselves. Loyalty is sacred to them, and betrayal of that trust is felt as a kind of emotional violence. INFJs will not allow others to define their beliefs for them. They often have highly personalized, sometimes unconventional spiritual or philosophical frameworks that guide their lives. They may not always speak about it openly, but these beliefs are deeply personal and integral to their identity. When others ridicule their worldview, try to convert them, or force dogmatic thinking onto them, it violates a core part of their freedom. INFJs might entertain opposing viewpoints and even be open to growth, but they will not allow coercion or disrespect of their inner truth. There's a boundary INFJs hold around emotional reciprocity, an unspoken expectation that if they invest emotionally in a connection, the other person will, at some point, meet them halfway. INFJs are natural givers. They listen, support, and intuit others' emotional needs with uncanny accuracy. But beneath that generous spirit lies a quiet expectation of mutual depth. When they consistently offer their time, attention, and energy but receive little to nothing in return, no vulnerability, no sincerity, no meaningful effort, they feel not only unappreciated but emotionally invisible. Over time, this imbalance becomes intolerable. They may not confront the issue directly, especially if they suspect the other person lacks the capacity for emotional depth, but the INFJ will slowly back away. They withdraw not out of cruelty, but out of necessity, to preserve their emotional well-being. There's also a firm boundary around being misunderstood deliberately. Everyone is misunderstood from time to time. It's human. INFJs understand that. But when someone consistently misrepresents them, oversimplifies their motives, or refuses to engage with their deeper intentions, it feels like a denial of their essence. This is especially painful because INFJs spend so much of their time trying to understand others. When that effort isn't returned, or worse, is met with mockery or suspicion, it becomes a source of deep loneliness. INFJs may try to explain themselves once, maybe even twice. But if the other person insists on misunderstanding them, whether out of laziness, defensiveness, or ego, the INFJ will quietly close the door. Another line INFJs draw, often early and instinctively, relates to exploitation of their empathy. They can sense when someone is using emotional manipulation, especially the kind that disguises itself as vulnerability. This might look like people who constantly play the victim, who twist situations to gain sympathy, or who become emotionally needy without taking responsibility for their own healing. INFJs might initially feel compelled to help, because their empathy is both intuitive and active. But once they recognize the pattern as draining, exploitative, or self-serving, they will shut it down. They've learned, often the hard way, that not everyone who appears wounded wants to grow, and not everyone who cries out for help is willing to meet them halfway in healing. A boundary even fewer people understand is INFJ's intolerance for shallow intimacy. Casual surface-level relationships and friendships may seem harmless, but to an INFJ, they're deeply unfulfilling and often emotionally exhausting. INFJs crave soul-level bonds, relationships that challenge them intellectually, stir them spiritually, and allow for shared vulnerability. When they're forced to maintain superficial connections, whether in family dynamics, social circles, or work settings, they feel emotionally malnourished. If these surface-level interactions are unavoidable, INFJs will create an inner boundary. They'll engage just enough to be polite, but their true self will remain hidden. Attempts to force more without depth, or demands for intimacy without mutual understanding, will be quietly deflected. Being ignored or emotionally neglected is another profound boundary breach. INFJs won't usually fight for attention. They often prefer staying in the background. But that doesn't mean they're emotionally passive. When they're in relationships, romantic or otherwise, they are fully invested. If someone they care about becomes cold, distant, or inconsistent without explanation, the INFJ won't beg for closeness. They will observe, feel the wound, and begin the slow, painful process of detachment. What hurts isn't just the absence of attention. It's the breaking of the unspoken emotional contract they believed was mutual. INFJs don't take relationships lightly, and when someone breaks the relationship without acknowledgement, they internalize it deeply. But they also learn from it, and they rarely go back. An invisible boundary they hold dear is one that guards the INFJ's moral and spiritual compass. INFJs often live by a deeply personal code, one shaped not by external rules, but by an inner sense of justice, empathy, and integrity. If someone attempts to pressure them into compromising those values, whether through social pressure, manipulation, or ridicule, they may not resist loudly, but they will resist. They will not abandon what they believe is right simply to maintain peace. Their integrity is often quiet but unshakable, and when pushed, they will prioritize what they believe in, even if it costs them the relationship. This boundary is immovable because it defines who they are. These boundaries, while often unspoken, form a protective architecture around the INFJ's life. They are not walls meant to exclude. They are thresholds meant to preserve depth, meaning, and emotional integrity. And while INFJs may forgive in time, They rarely forget. A boundary once crossed may not always lead to confrontation, but it often results in quiet, irreversible shifts in how they relate to you. Their distance is never random. It is an act of self-respect.